I was yelling at him, Coach Babers, Coach Babers. And he came over and he said, girl, I'm not supposed to be smiling. I'm supposed to like keep a straight face while we're getting warmed up for the game. And here you are out here making me smile. He's like, I'm going to get in trouble. And he gave me a hug and ran away. But
welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. I'm joined today by Kaitlyn Cunningham, who is the director of women's basketball S&C at Clemson University. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. Always a good day when I can record a podcast, catch up with friends, all that good stuff. So a little bit about how she and I know each other is this crazy, crazy story. A mentor of mine, Steve, just knows Kaitlyn and just recommended that we chatted. And then that's kind of it. But so you're the second person that knows Steve firsthand. So the last episode, we talked about how Steve, like, I'm not the only person that thinks he's awesome, because I mentioned like Steve a lot on my podcast. So he's not just some mystic creature. So you know him too.
Yes, he's a real human being, and he is a phenomenal person and leader. So shout out to Steve for getting us connected.
Big shout out. And it's funny that I have people on my podcast like all over the country, and then I see him like 6 days a week, and we even talk 7 days a week.
Yeah, I know this guy.
We have talked about him being on my podcast multiple times, but stuff happens, as I'm sure you're well aware.
Yep.
So Kaitlyn is a podcast host herself, which I'm sure we'll get into. But for those who are not familiar, could you please share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so grew up actually 45 minutes west of Chicago, so out in your neck of the woods. I am one of 4 kids. I'm the oldest. I have 3 younger siblings, some awesome parents, and fell in love with soccer growing up, and that took me to the University of Kansas, where I earned my undergrad degree in exercise science. Fell in love with the weight room, was really fortunate to have 2 amazing female role models there, one of which was my personal strength coach when I played soccer, Molly McKinnon, now Molly McKinnon-Rupp, who actually has gotten out of strength and conditioning. That could probably be a story in itself, right, for all the people who have gotten out of the field. And then the other amazing woman I got to be underneath, Andrea Hootie, who was the director of Olympic sports strength and conditioning out there, who is now with Texas men's basketball. So after I graduated there, I was offered the opportunity, if I passed my CSCS, right, because that's extremely important in our field to have your certification, I could go be a paid intern, so that upped the ante even more, to follow a gentleman from Kansas, Brady Holt, to go to University of Vermont. So packed my car up. Dad moved me out from Kansas, went back to Chicago for a quick little break. My grandfather had passed away at that time, so, funeral, and then packed my car back up and moved all the way to Vermont. Let me tell you, that was a hike. But what an amazing place. If you've never been, I would highly, highly suggest it. I was only there for a month. So I think I got there the 4th of July. And by the beginning of August, Hootie called and said, have a couple opportunities you need to put your name in for. You need to go get your master's. Okay, done. So put my name in, got hired at Eastern Illinois, where I earned my master's, and actually was only there for a year. And the gentleman who hired me, Eric Cash, got a phone call from Clemson. They were looking for a female to work with women's soccer, strength and conditioning for them. And he was like, that's you. You played. You love the sport. So put my name in the hat. And, all right, here we go. They offered me the position. Once again, packed my car up with my dad. He moved me out here, and I told him, please be ready to come back in a couple of years, because I know how this profession works. You're not usually at a place for a very long time. And that was a lie, because here I am today, almost 10 years later, now working with women's basketball as the director over here. So 2 years on the Olympic side, and now I think I'm going into year 7, so that'd be 9 years, almost 10. So that's how I got to where I am today.
That's awesome. Work hard for the right people and good stuff happens. And that's funny about your Vermont thing. You probably spent half as much time in the car as you did actually in in Vermont.
You're right. And I also had to make a pit stop on the way there. I was getting extremely tired, and your parents check in on you all the time, especially when you're fresh out of college. And my dad was like, nope, next stop, you have a hotel room, you better pull over. And so I did. And yeah, it took quite some time to get up there, that's for sure. But
It,
well
it
worth it.
definitely it definitely must be a Midwest thing, just like going to school at TCU. Like I've driven from Chicago to Texas on a Friday, and then Texas to Chicago on Sunday. And like I know people from Texas, they'll fly from Dallas to San Antonio.
Yeah.
Like a 4 hour drive. I'm like, that's like I could do that with my eyes closed, you know? And then another question. So whenever you went to Kansas or Clemson or Vermont, did anyone say that you had a Chicago accent?
Yes. And now they tell me I have a Southern accent. So
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Cause when I first, my undergrad was in Missouri and people told me that, I'm like, no, I don't. And then I went to Texas. They're like, bro, like you have a Chicago accent. I'm like, what are you talking about?
yes, 100%. And then they always said my parents' accent was thicker than mine. And I was like, well, I would hope so. They've been alive for longer than me. So that makes logical sense.
And then last thing, so I'll give you your opportunity for a plug now, as this is very important as part of what you do. But if you could just give a brief rundown on kind of your podcast, how that came to be, and just your vision for all that.
Yeah, so the idea actually didn't really come about until I started working over here with basketball. And I worked with a phenomenal man, Mike Bewley, who actually is now moved on and working with Play. And he started a podcast for his own personal business, DWMA. And so I was like, well, that's kind of a cool idea. Like, that'd be pretty fun, meet people, talk to them. And I was like, what could be like my niche, right? Like, what kind of area could I go into? And being a female in the field, and seeing it evolve, and just, the amount of women in our field has grown, I thought, how cool to be able to tell their stories and just kind of get them to be, more known. It doesn't have to be well known, but just to kind of put people out there, the exposure. And so I talked about it probably for 2 years, and I never did it. I had all these great ideas. I even thought of names for the podcast, thought of cover graphics, because I like to be nerdy like that, and I just never pulled the trigger. And finally, I believe it was 2 years later, I was like, you know what? You need to stop sitting around and talking about it. You just need to do it. And if you go back and listen to episode number 1 with Andrea Hootie, it is atrocious. It is not a great example of what I can truly do as a podcaster, but that's okay, right? You're supposed to grow as you do these things. And let's just say it was so bad that I asked her for 30 minutes of her time, and 15 minutes in, I was done with all the questions that I had written up. And she was like, that's it? No, we're not done. So she started interviewing me. We've come a long way. I think I've recorded almost 30 episodes now. But yeah, if people out there are willing to take a listen and provide any feedback, I'm more than happy to hear it. Always looking to make it better, or with other females that they think would be great guests to have on there. I would more than appreciate any of that insight. So
Links to all that stuff will be in the show notes if you send me those whenever we're done recording. But it's funny you mentioned that, as I superfluously hit refresh every episode, every hour on the hour, checking how many views I get. And I was like 30 or 40 episodes in, and then my view counts would go up, and I'd check like which episode was actually getting views. And the first one just kept getting views. And it was like me for like 15 minutes in my living room with my like computer microphone, not even headphones, my computer microphone. And I'm just like, why are people listening to this garbage? Like, it was just to do it. Like, it wasn't even an actual episode. Like, why are you listening? But it's just so funny. Like every stage, and similar to how we talked about like my podcast microphone, like literally I was like, who would spend money on a podcast microphone? Like, you get headphones for free. Well, comes with like $1,000 phone, but you get headphones for free. Like, why don't you just use that? And then just like how I title my episodes and my art, my first podcast art, I literally just made with sticks and circles on Microsoft Word. Like, I'm not even kidding. I showed this to Steve yesterday and we were dying. I'm like, who let me post this? It was like sticks and squares and circles with words. It was so bad.
The
But
evolution, right? I mean,
it
like
is, it is, it is. So it's funny, like, and I distinctly remember like each phase of my podcast. It was like the first 20, and then it was 20 to 40, and then it was like 50 to like 60 or 70, and now like 75 and up. And it's just like interesting to reflect back. So it is all a journey. So but now you're on the other side of the podcast table, and I'll try to do my host thing. So let's get into it. What is the coolest story you have thus far in your career?
coolest story. I'm going to go back to when I was a graduate assistant. The head football coach, Bob Spoo, retired. And, you know, as a strength and conditioning staff, you're kind of left just with the unknown, right? Who are they going to bring in? What are things going to be? What are they going to look like? Et cetera, et cetera. And the staff at the time was 2 full-time and then 3 graduate assistants. So graduate assistants outweighed the full-time. And they hired Dino Babers. We had a couple changes amongst the strength and conditioning staff. And I didn't know Dino very well, right? I was just a GA, and you know, he comes into the weight room, you say hi, you kind of mind your business. I'm low man on the totem pole, and I'm also a female, right? I'm working with football. And so I just put my head down. I went to work every day. I loved working with those football student athletes. They respected me. I respected them. It was just kind of a fun environment to be a part of. And when Dino had recruits on campus, he made it a point to come to the strength staff and make sure that I was a large part of this recruiting process in the weight room. And he said specifically, I want her demonstrating a lift. That was kind of how things were ran for him and his staff. The recruits would come in, they'd kind of get an idea of what the weight room was going to be run like. And so recruit number 1, you know, I demonstrating, I don't know, we even remember something very, you know, simple. And after that visit, he came back to the weight room, might've been the next day. And he said, look, I want her moving some weight. Like, I don't care what the lift is. She can squat, she can do a clean, whatever you guys want to demonstrate, but I want her under the bar or with the barbell in her hands. I'm kind of like, oh, okay, like this is going to get interesting. And his reasoning for that, after discussions with him, was, you know, these young men who are coming into his program are raised by women majority of the time. And so their moms, their grandmas, their aunts, whoever it may be, are usually on that visit with them. And he felt it was important that a woman made a presence, you know, amongst their recruiting visit. And I was the one in the weight room. So the next visit, the staff decided that I was going to do hang power clean, and I was hooked up to a Tendo unit. So now the pressure's on, right? Like, you better freaking move the weight fast. But he also, like, I don't want like 5-pound plate on there. Like, he wanted some weight being moved. So it might've been 95 pounds, but regardless, right? So we did it. He was extremely happy. And I'll just never forget the way that made me feel, to be the example on those recruiting visits, to feel him empowering me as a woman in his program and in the weight room with his team was just really cool, really unique. That's not something you get, you know, everywhere or every program where a female is working with male student athletes. And so that was really powerful, but also just thinking about the environment he wanted to create with his team. Very inclusive, right? You know, you have people from all walks of life, but you also have all different genders and, you know, people who identify different ways. And that was just really cool to kind of see how he did that. And then to kind of tack onto it, when I then got offered the position here and told him I was leaving, he said, okay, great, I want to do an exit interview with you. And I'm like, I'm a GA. Like, what am I going to, you know, kind of offer you that you don't already know. But again, just empowering, and felt that I truly added value to him and to his program. And so, I hope that the people, everyone listening, will kind of take that and do the same with their staffs or just their student athletes that they work with, make them feel like they're adding value and listen to what they have to say. So that's probably the coolest story thus far from my career.
How long? Because you were only at your GA for a year. So how much time had elapsed from when you first started to that first like recruiting visit? Because probably not like you had a year under your belt. It's like I know her super well, So like kind of how quick did that happen?
Very quickly. He had come from Baylor, I believe was his stop prior to Eastern Illinois, and they had a couple of women on their football staff there who helped out, and so that was ingrained in him, right, since however long he was at Baylor. And so, no joke, I think he was only there he got hired during winter, so we're doing mat drills and all those fun things, and recruits were coming on campus probably weeks after he got hired. So it was not long at all. We hadn't even really built a personal connection yet. But again, that's why it makes it even more empowering and just inclusive, that environment that he was trying to create.
Big time players make big time plays. That's what I like to say. It's either sink or swim, and sometimes there's things you're prepared to do or not prepared to do, but you were obviously there for a reason, and his reasoning for doing that obviously made sense, and you made it happen, and that's definitely a quality, whether it's a podcast, after much rumination about starting it, or whether it's, hey, we got recruits on Monday, all we're gonna have an Olympic weightlifting meet. You better have a PR total,
Yep, train and be ready for it.
and that's just to speak on the importance of simply just like genuinely believing in someone, and not to make this all like rah inspirational, but coaching is something my boss says a lot. Coaching is bringing out of people what they couldn't bring out of themselves, or like helping them go where they couldn't go by themselves, because that's if they could do it all themselves, then they wouldn't need a coach. So whether it's you to your student athletes, or whether it's you just to interns, colleagues, just truly believing and genuinely like being in their corner and empowering them, whether it's giving them actual opportunities or just empowering them with just like support, like, because imposter syndrome, oh my gosh, that's we won't go down that little rabbit hole, my quarter life crisis that I'm going through right now. But just like how fundamental was that? Just like you're a month in, it's just like, hey, you're going to be a huge part of bringing the players that are going to make this program what it is next year, the year after that, for 4 years. So I know you mentioned a little bit about how you and this coach interact now, and so that was 10 years ago ish.
Yeah, 9 years ago. So 2012, I got hired here at Clemson, and so I was with him for the beginning part of 2012, right? So probably not even 6 months.
So if you could just speak on kind of the relationship that you guys have been able to maintain, and just how that simple thing has turned into the friendship that you guys have now.
Yeah, so after Eastern Illinois, he then got hired at Bowling Green out in Ohio, and then got hired at Syracuse. And so now being at Clemson, Syracuse being a part of the ACC, he plays Clemson, Clemson plays Syracuse. And so when women's basketball travels to Syracuse, I always make it a point to do my, best if he's in town. Clearly, there's circumstances that might keep him away, but to see him, to see other coaches, whether it's strength and conditioning staff or, his assistants that were with him at Eastern Illinois that I knew, I always try and make it a point to say hello, to catch up, whatever it may be. And then same when they come down here to play Clemson in football, see if I can, meet up with them. I had my dad here for a football game, and we got down on the sideline before kickoff while the teams were warming up, and Dino and their strength coach, Coach E, were running towards the locker room, their last one before they come out for kickoff, and I was yelling at him, Coach Babers, Coach Babers. And he came over and he said, girl, I'm not supposed to be smiling. I'm supposed to like keep a straight face while we're getting warmed up for the game. And here you are out here making me smile. He's like, I'm going to get in trouble. And he gave me a hug and ran away. But it's pretty cool just to be able to keep that relationship with him. And it all started with him empowering me in the weight room as a part of his staff. So pretty cool.
And then just giving you that platform and that opportunity to be you, you know, and it's not, hey, you have to say X. It was kind of, you have to do Y, but
right.
it was, hey, here's this thing that I want to accomplish. You're part of my staff. You're here for a reason. And here's how I want to help you. I want you to help me with this vision for this program. So that's awesome. And last thing kind of on that, as I've been going down my job search, networking, just journey, it's people can often get in this mindset of like, I have to hit people up in X amount of days. You know, like I might know someone that has an Excel sheet that counts how many days since they talked to someone, just a friend. And, you know, oh, well, why didn't you hit me up after X? Or like, why haven't you talked to me? It's just as, and that might hold people back from reaching out, is that fear of like someone asking, well, where you've been? Well, just as likely as they can ask you that, you can ask them that. But it's those relationships where it's, let's say you and coach just didn't cross paths for 2 years. I'm sure the first thing out of your guys' mouths isn't, where have you been? You know, it's just having this like mutual respect and understand that it's like, hey, we're going to make it happen if we can, but we're both busy people. We're both professionals, you know, and it's almost like those relationships where the longer you spend apart, just the cooler it is that it feels, you know, like it's been a week. So that's something that I've just learned, is that those are the best ones, where it's just a mutual understanding that people are busy and like stuff happens, but you know, it just makes it that much better whenever stuff does work out. So super cool story. And that was a cool story. Next question. What is the story most fundamental leading to now? So if X didn't happen, you know, you wouldn't be where you are now.
Yeah. So this would be during my time here at Clemson, working with Mike Bewley. He is good friends with Jeremy Boone, who also is my connection with Steve. And Jeremy runs, you know, his own company primarily around leadership. And so one of his, I guess I'd say courses, it's probably not the right term that Jeremy would want me to use, but forgive me, Jeremy, if you listen to this, but it's called Leader Kit. And in some aspect, everybody is a leader in their life, right? Whether it's in a relationship, personally, as a coach, with your student athletes, with the staff around you, whatever it may be. But to be quite honest, if I had to grade myself overall, maybe 2 years ago, I sucked. I sucked as a leader. And I had some good qualities. That's not to say that I didn't have them, but overall, I would not grade myself very high. And I'm probably being hard on myself, but that's okay. So Mike had Jeremy come in and do an audit on him and his leadership, right? Because he was like, I feel like I'm doing all these right things. I'm doing all these things right. I'm doing these great things for our program. And we're not figuring it out. And so he said, you know what? The only way to figure it out is to have somebody come in and look at what I'm doing. So he did. He brought Jeremy in. Jeremy spoke to some guys on the men's team. Hey, what about Mike? You know, asked his questions. And then he said, I'm going to sit down with you. And I was like, oh, like he's going to ask me questions. I'm not good at all this, right? And so we did. We sat in my office, not very long. Jeremy's a smart guy. He can figure things out, you know. And so I love Mike. Mike was phenomenal for me. I thought he was a great leader, this and that. And to come from all of that, right? Mike was doing great things. Jeremy was like, hey, let's get you in Leader Kit and kind of refine your leadership skills. You're doing a lot of really, really good things. I think there's just some things we can hone in and make you even better. And if I'm not mistaken, Mike can correct me if I'm wrong, but he said, well, if I'm doing this, she's a staff. And so if I'm going to be better, then she's going to be better. Okay. So Jeremy calls me one day, hey, like, are you really up for this? You know, like, I'm going to expect a lot out of you. Yeah, man, like, I'm all in. Like, if Mike wants me to do it, if it's going to make me better, yeah, let's do it. And so that was like the turning point, right? Like, here it comes, like, you better get your mind right. And so throughout Leader Kit, you go through, some different things. You learn a lot about yourself, and then you start to develop, okay, how can I be better for those that I'm leading? And so something I did was I asked a young lady who now is actually in the coaching world. I hit her with a text message because I knew if I was to ask somebody what kind of a leader I was and what she's seen me become, I can't ask a current student athlete because they're going to blow smoke, right? Like, well, I don't want coach to get mad at me if I tell her she wasn't a good leader 2 years ago. And so I went to someone who I felt like was going to tell me the truth. And her message basically said, like, you tolerated way too much, my first couple of years. You were inconsistent with when you held people accountable, who you held accountable, and which are all things I knew about myself, right? Like, this isn't surprising. But it also reaffirmed that those young women felt exactly how I knew I was coaching, and that's not fair. That's not being a good leader. And so the best part of her message, though, was by my senior year, you were so much better as a leader. You were more consistent. Your accountability was even across the board. If I did this, I was held this way. If a walk-on did it, she was held to the same standard that I was. And she was a starter. She killed it, right? Her entire 4 years here. So being a part of Leader Kit and not only learning more about myself, but how do I frame this for my student athletes and my coaching staff was a huge, huge part in my development. And forget the X's and O's of strength and conditioning. I can read that online and all those books. I mean, certifications, whatever, but building buy-in, getting kids to do the things that they need to do to become better leaders themselves, right? Like, we're not on the court or the field with these student athletes. So teaching them all these things was monumental for me as a leader and as a coach of Clemson women's basketball. So that'd be my story for that one.
It does go so beyond the X's and O's, the stories, lessons, and experiences. Oh my gosh. And within that story, it's built on having connections that are strong enough to handle the truth. Kind of just going through some Leader Kit stuff myself with Steve, and was so fortunate that that has just become an opportunity for me. But all of that started with just Mike, and I've chatted with Mike before. Very intense man.
Yes.
But very grateful for him and just how he handled his chat with me, and with him being open enough to saying, I need to be better. Someone else, this is the best in the world, to tell me how it is. Like, if he were to ask you, if he were to ask some of his athletes, if he were to ask maybe his AD, like, there's just more on the line, at least kind of in their eyes. Not to say that it's their fault, but like, similar to how you said your athlete might not have told you exactly how it was, because there are those things that are just there. And then I can only imagine when it was you and Jeremy in his office, you're just like, oh my gosh, this is not going to go well at all. Very short time, as you mentioned, but so then just kind of going through that, and then Mike just believing in you, a theme of your story, just believing in you is like, hey, like, she's going to be here. I want her to level up also, because she can do some awesome stuff. And then you being open enough to, like, this is going to be uncomfortable. I can only imagine how comfortable that quick meeting was. Imagine volunteering yourself to do that on a weekly basis. And then not only when you're actually chatting, but also the homework and the stuff like that, and that reflection and whatnot. But
Yeah.
one thing I liked about your story was that you had already known all of this stuff before. And if the listener is feeling a certain way, or they think that they might not be where they need to be, then they're probably right. You're obviously the expert on yourself. So it's good to get that confirmation, not necessarily positive or negative, but just to confirm, like, yeah, like, you're probably right. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? So I think that's a super cool story. And anyone that isn't too familiar with Jeremy Boone and his stuff, I'm a complete endorser as well. And like, Steve's just been taking me through it. I haven't even like been one of the actual participants. So I can only imagine just going through it in full speed. So just super grateful for that opportunity. And you've seen a big impact in your life, but how kind of all those things played out, and And hopefully I did that little summary justice.
You did. It was excellent.
Awesome. Second to last big question. What is the story you are most proud of thus far in your career?
So actually, it's going to relate to that young lady that I texted from my story previously. She, is now coaching, like I probably mentioned. Well, she's not actually a coach on the floor, but regardless, she's working with young women who also play basketball. And so watching her throughout her 4 years as a leader, she's very talented on the floor, just a great person. But in the weight room, I'm always trying to instill leadership in these kids. And so I stole this from Mike Bewley. We do squad leaders. And so it's one individual who is in charge of basically taking their team through the workout each day that they come into the weight room, primarily in the off season, just based on time. And just trying to get them to use their voice, to be okay with when people aren't doing the right things, to making sure that we're getting them back on track, and they can carry that then over to the court. And did this for three years with this young lady. And she, in her last year, was working camp, right? So we put on camp for little kids, and in our weight room looks out onto our practice court. So I'm on the treadmill, getting some cardio in and just watching camp. And she's out there leading them, all the campers, through, I think it might have been some ball handling work. And the door's propped open so I can hear her, and I don't have music on or anything. And just sitting there watching and listening, I'm like, this kid gets it. Like, she really, really has grown throughout her 4 years. So that's like kind of proud moment number one, right? Like everything we're doing from a leadership standpoint, it's paying off while she's here. And then you always wonder, like, what happens when they leave? Like, do they forget everything that you taught them, or are they taking that stuff with them and putting it into action? And so she reached out to me a couple weeks ago, and she was excited because she had put weight on. She's a young lady who I was constantly trying to, like, all right, come on, like, we got to put a little bit of weight on you so you can perform to your best, yada, yada, yada. So she's excited, right? So she texts me, and a little stab at her. I know it wasn't from being in the weight room, so it was everything she was putting in her mouth. But that conversation kind of led to just different things about life, right? Like updating her on me, talking about her. She then asked about the team. And I said that I was really proud of one of the young ladies who is still on the team that she played with. And she had a rough year last year, and she seems to be back on track with kind of where she was 2 years ago. And I said this to her, that I was really proud of her, and I feel like she's getting back to that point. And she goes, yeah, well, Coach C, when I saw her over the summer, I basically called her out and told her, like, what are you doing? This is like not who you were my senior year when we went it back to the NCAA tournament for the first time in 17 years. You then like hit this brick wall and did nothing that you did the year before. Like, what's up with that? So I think they kind of, dove deep into that stuff. And just to hear her talk about how she used everything she learned. And I told her in the text message, like, I am so freaking proud of you and the leader that you are after you were, done here and you're not around all the things that we had in place for you to be successful here. But her response back was, I had some pretty amazing people to learn from and to watch and observe. So, for any coach or anybody listening, just, you're always the example, whether it's through your words, the things you say to these student athletes, or through your actions, the things that they see you do. So just pay attention to everything that, you're doing and you're saying around them, because they're sponges, they take it up. And you can make a huge impact on them in their lives after they're done with their 4 years with you. So.
And having that belief in that individual, and like I would assume taking her through all this leadership stuff wasn't all roses and rainbows, right?
No, and she saw me at my worst. So think about that as well, right? Like
Yeah.
learning what not to do, essentially.
And her belief in you, imagine you not being the best leader and then you turning around and being like, let's talk about leadership. I'm going to help you out. So,
Yeah.
so that's just a testament to her and to you, and just like the relationship that you were able to create, regardless of the leadership, just you as a human, and then her as a human, and then her just having that trust in you just as a person, and then you having the opportunity for Mike and your openness to go through that yourself, and then you're believing in her, kind of going through all of that stuff, and then her believing in you, kind of just seeing both sides of the coin, and then her believing in that individual and kind of calling her out, um, and then that individual believing her to continue that conversation. And I think belief is just a theme, but it's not like you can do this and then you turn around and you're like, no, they can't.
It's genuine, right? And
Yes, it's definitely genuine for sure.
all of that improvement and growth, it's got to start with the truth. And that's exactly what this young lady did. Was she approached her with the truth, like, hey, you're not clearly doing the things that you did the year before to make you successful, and helped her get on back on track. So let's hope that keeps going, all season long. So.
Awesome. Hopefully it'll be fun to watch. So last big thing. So I love the theoretical, the stories, the lessons, the experiences, but I do like some X's and O's, but X's and O's as to how we can become better as professionals. So if you had 1 to 3 action steps, as specific or just vague general as you want, the listener can start doing tomorrow to become better, what would they be?
Number one, be your true authentic self. And if you don't know who that person is, then I would recommend you find a way to figure that out. Mine was a little bit of that reinforcement from Jeremy and being a part of Leader Kit, because there was a self-assessment to start out with. And I think that was very important to either A, open my eyes to things that I wasn't aware of, or B, just reaffirm the things that I already knew to be true. So you will never be your best coach or your best if you can't be who you truly are. And so I'll steal Jeremy's quote: you can't outperform your self-identity. And so, if you're telling yourself lies, if you just don't believe in yourself, then you're never going to be your best. So that would be number one. Figure out who your true authentic self is. And then my second one would be the example. So, if you're asking your student athletes to train hard and push themselves, then by golly, you better do it yourself. And same with nutrition, or you're asking them to just be better students. Maybe it's in the classroom for them, but you better do the same in your profession as well. Do your readings, do your continuing educations, and let them see that what you ask them to do is what you're also going to do in your own life as well. So those would be my 2 actionable things.
More is caught than taught. I got that from the TCU women's tennis coach. And a quick kind of just funny story on that. It was like the first cold day of the year, in quotes. It was like 40s maybe, and I'm in like shorts and a sweatshirt, and they're all looking at me like I'm crazy. I'm like, this is barbecue weather. Like, what are you talking about? It's like first cold day of the year. And the girls were just like, like all bundled up, just thinking it was going to be a bad practice. And then coach comes walking out. He's all hyped. He's like hitting tennis balls outside of the fence and whatnot. And then it was like one of the best practices of the year. And then I asked him, I was like, Coach, what did you take beforehand? And can I have some of that? Like, that was sweet. He's like, I think I need a nap, but then he was just saying, he's like, how can I ask these girls to bring the energy if it's cold and I'm not doing it myself? And then he hit me with the more is caught than taught. So if if you're being your authentic self, which does take a long time to get to, or just very tough, potentially uncomfortable questions, but if you're being yourself, and if you're being the best example you can be, aligning with your words, then I can only imagine that that is a pretty close to, not perfect, or I don't know, it's a pretty solid recipe. I'll put it that way. So
Yeah.
one a little bit more vague, but one a little bit more actionable. And I
Mhm.
found this in my own coaching. If I ever am like a little lazy demonstrating a drill, or just, whatever it may be, not setting the best example, and I feel that way, well, chances are that that's how it is. So
Mhm.
it's just like listening to yourself, and because you know yourself best, and like just having been an athlete myself, you were an athlete and just coaching for so long, you're probably spot on. So just to listen to yourself, because you do know yourself best, and you're probably right for sure.
Mhm.
Fantastic. So I like to say thank you. Oh, where can the listeners get more of you? Any chance to plug your stuff? I'm giving you the floor.
Yeah, so social media, um, Twitter and Instagram, I believe both of those handles are K_Cunningham 32. And you can find more on my website, kacunningham.com. That has my podcast as well. So there's a blog and then podcasts and some other things on there. You can check that out. And email always works for me as well if people want to get in touch. KCUNNI 3 So
Fantastic. So thank you very much for your time, just for kind of pulling the curtain back in your experiences and how that's made you who you are. And I'm sure that I know this is going to be an awesome episode, and I'm excited to share it with everyone else. So thank you very much for your time.
yeah, thank you.